There is a smell that stops people. It does not matter where you are from, how old you are, or what language you speak. You have experienced it 1,000 times, and you will recognize it from the first sentence that describes it. The air changes. Something enters it. Not strong, not sharp, but unmistakable. Earthy. Clean. Ancient in a way you cannot explain. It arrives just as rain begins to hit dry ground, or just after, and the moment it reaches you, something happens that goes beyond recognition. Not just I smell something deeper, a feeling that arrives with the smell, a sensation of relief or safety or memory that most people experience, but almost no one can put into words. You know the smell. You have known it your entire life. And it has a name. The reason it does what it does to you, the reason it bypasses your thinking mind and reaches something older, is a story that begins with bacteria dying in soil and ends with the architecture of your brain. And the physics of how it reaches your nose, from the ground to the air, was not understood until 2015. What you smell before rain and the smell after rain are two completely different chemistry events. We will get to both. Start with the one you know best, the earthy richness that rises from the ground when rain arrives. In 1964, two Australian researchers, Isabel Joy Baer and Richard Thomas, working at the CSIRO in Melbourne, published a paper in Nature identifying the source of the smell that rises from dry earth after rain. They needed a word for it. No word existed in English. Baer and Thomas coined one from two Greek roots, petra, meaning stone, and ichor, the fluid that flows in the veins of the gods in Greek mythology. Petrichor, the blood of the stones. The smell of rain on dry earth had a name, and the name was beautiful, and the chemistry behind it turned out to be stranger than the name. The molecule responsible for the dominant earthy note of petrichor is called geosmin, trans 1,10-dimethyl, trans 9-decolol. Geosmin is produced by Streptomyces bacteria, a genus of soil microorganisms responsible for much of the decomposition of organic matter in healthy soil. Streptomyces are everywhere. A single gram of garden earth may contain millions of them, and the characteristic smell of freshly turned soil is largely their chemical signature. The geosmin you smell is not produced by living bacteria. It is released when Streptomyces die and their cells break apart, spilling geosmin into the spaces between soil particles. But geosmin is not just a waste product. Research published in Nature Microbiology in 2020 showed that the smell serves a biological purpose for the bacteria themselves. Geosmin attracts springtails, tiny soil arthropods barely visible to the naked eye, that feed on Streptomyces colonies. When springtails eat the bacteria, they carry Streptomyces spores on their bodies and in their feces, dispersing the bacteria to new locations in the soil. The smell of rain is also a reproductive strategy. Geosmin is how Streptomyces recruit their own seed dispersers. Baer and Thomas identified a second component alongside geosmin: plant oils. During dry periods, vegetation releases volatile oils that are absorbed into clay minerals and porous rocks. When rain arrives, these trapped oils are released alongside geosmin, contributing a lighter, slightly sweet note to the petrichor blend. The full smell of rain on dry earth is a mixture. Bacterial death chemistry and stored plant oils both released simultaneously. Accumulation matters. Soil that has been dry for a week or more contains maximum geosmin. The Streptomyces have been dying and releasing their chemistry into a soil matrix that has no water to flush it away. Soil that was rained on yesterday contains almost none. The previous rain already launched the available geosmin into the air and washed the rest deeper into the earth. This is why the first rain after a long dry spell produces the most intense petrichor. The soil has been accumulating chemistry, waiting. Now, your sensitivity to this molecule is extraordinary. Humans can detect geosmin at concentrations as low as 5 parts per trillion. To put that in proportion, a shark can detect blood in seawater at roughly 1 part per million. You are approximately 200,000 times more sensitive to geosmin than a shark is to blood. 5 parts per trillion means that if you dissolved a single drop of geosmin into an Olympic swimming pool, your nose could detect it. No instrument in most chemistry laboratories can match this sensitivity. Your olfactory system, for this one molecule, operates at a detection threshold that borders on the theoretical minimum, approaching the point where you would be detecting individual molecules. Think about that. Your nose evolved to detect a bacterial waste product at concentrations most analytical instruments cannot measure. That level of sensitivity does not happen by accident. Something in your evolutionary history made it essential that you could smell this molecule from miles away, in concentrations so low they barely exist. We will come back to why. But first, how does geosmin get from the soil to your nose? You see, geosmin sitting in dry soil is invisible and undetectable. It is trapped between soil particles, held in place by surface tension and the dry matrix of the earth. It cannot reach your nose until something releases it into the air. That something is rain. In 2015, Young-Soo Jung and Cullen Bui at MIT published a study in Nature Communications that solved this with high-speed cameras running at thousands of frames per second. They filmed individual raindrops hitting porous surfaces and discovered something no one had predicted. When a raindrop strikes dry soil, it does not simply soak in. At the moment of impact, the drop traps a thin layer of air between its leading edge and the ground surface. That trapped air forms tiny bubbles, dozens of them, inside the raindrop as it flattens across the soil. These bubbles rise to the top of the flattened drop and burst, each one launching a jet of microscopic aerosol droplets upward into the air. Bui's high-speed footage showed that a single raindrop, one drop, roughly 2 to 3 millimeters in diameter, can generate up to several hundred aerosol droplets upon impact. Each aerosol droplet is tiny, a few micrometers across, and each one carries geosmin, soil bacteria, and organic compounds from the surface into the air column above the ground. Multiply that by the millions of raindrops hitting each square meter of dry earth per minute during a rain shower, and the volume of soil chemistry being launched into the atmosphere is enormous. Think of champagne. When a bubble rises to the surface of a glass and bursts, it launches a tiny jet of aroma-laden droplets into the air above the wine. This is why champagne smells more intensely than still wine. The raindrop on soil mechanism is identical physics at a different scale, except the glass is the ground. The champagne is rain. And the aroma compounds are the death chemistry of 1 billion soil bacteria. Jung and Bui filmed this in slow motion, and the images are remarkable. Tiny jets of aerosol erupting from each raindrop surface like miniature geysers, each carrying its payload of geosmin into the air. Wind takes the aerosol plume from there, spreading it across the landscape, sometimes from miles downwind. This is how petrichor reaches your nose. Not by evaporation, not by diffusion, by the mechanical action of raindrops physically launching soil chemistry into the atmosphere. And here is the counterintuitive finding. Light rain produces more petrichor than heavy rain. Gentle drops hit the soil at lower velocity, giving trapped air bubbles more time to form and burst before the surface floods. Heavy rain saturates so quickly that the bubble mechanism is suppressed. The soil drowns before the aerosols can launch. A deluge smells less than a drizzle. The most intense petrichor arrives during the first gentle minutes of light rain on ground that has been dry for days. Maximum geosmin in the soil, optimal impact dynamics, peak aerosol generation. The physics has a sweet spot, and light rain on dry earth hits it precisely. Now the smell reaches you. Geosmin molecules, riding aerosol droplets launched by raindrop physics, enter your nostrils and dissolve in the thin mucus layer, coating your olfactory epithelium. A patch of sensory tissue the size of a postage stamp at the top of your nasal cavity, containing roughly 6 million receptor neurons. Each neuron expresses one type of receptor from a family of roughly 400 functional types. A geosmin molecule binds to its specific receptor. The receptor fires. What happens next is unlike anything that happens with any other sense you possess. This is where the story changes. Because the question is no longer what the smell is or how it reaches you. The question is why your brain does what it does when it arrives. Your olfactory bulb, the structure that receives signals from your olfactory receptor neurons, connects directly to the hippocampus and the amygdala. The hippocampus is the brain's primary center for consolidating new memories and indexing old ones. The amygdala processes emotional significance, tagging experiences as safe, dangerous, pleasant, threatening. No other sensory modality has this direct anatomical connection. Vision routes through the thalamus to the occipital cortex. Hearing routes through the thalamus to the temporal cortex. Touch through the thalamus to the somatosensory cortex. Every sense passes through a relay station that pre-processes and filters the signal before forwarding it for conscious interpretation. Smell bypasses the thalamus entirely. The signal goes from receptor to olfactory bulb to hippocampus and amygdala without intermediary filtering. Neuroscientists call this the Proust effect, after Marcel Proust's famous passage about a Madeleine dipped in tea, triggering an involuntary flood of childhood memories. The literary description turns out to be anatomically precise. Norm Sobel and colleagues at the Weizmann Institute, publishing in Nature in 1999, demonstrated through neuroimaging that olfactory stimuli activate the hippocampus and amygdala with a latency and intensity that visual and auditory stimuli do not match. Smell-triggered memories are not only faster, they are qualitatively different. They are more emotionally vivid, more spatially specific, and more likely to be first-person experiential rather than factual. You do not remember a fact about rain. You remember standing in it. You see, this is why a smell can trigger a memory before you consciously register what you are smelling. The neural pathway is shorter. The signal arrives at your memory and emotion centers before it arrives at the cortical regions responsible for conscious identification and naming. The feeling comes first. The naming comes second. You experience the emotion, the wash of childhood, the garden, the summer afternoon, the specific rain on a specific day decades ago, before your thinking brain catches up and says, "Oh, it is raining." For someone who has lived 60 or 70 years, the hippocampal response to Geosmin fires into a lifetime of accumulated rain associations, not abstract associations, specific ones, encoded across thousands of exposures, layered on top of each other, each one tagged with the emotional valence the amygdala assigned at the time. The first rain you remember, the garden your grandmother kept, the afternoon you got caught in a storm and ran for cover laughing. The smell is the key. The hippocampus is the lock. And the signal that turns the key bypasses every checkpoint your brain has between sensation and consciousness. This is what you cannot name when you smell rain. It is not the smell itself that moves you. It is the fact that the smell reaches your memory and emotion centers before it reaches your conscious awareness. The feeling arrives before the thought. By the time you think I smell rain, you have already been somewhere else, some other afternoon, some other garden, some other version of yourself. If it is raining where you are right now, or if you can remember the last time it rained, you felt this. The calm arrived before you identified the smell. The memory surfaced before you chose to remember. That is not poetry. That is the anatomy of your olfactory pathway operating exactly as it evolved to operate. Now, why are you 200,000 times more sensitive to this molecule than a shark is to blood? The leading hypothesis, supported by comparative olfactory research across primates and other mammals, is that geosmin sensitivity evolved as a water detection system. Your ancestors, living in the semi-arid savannas of East Africa 2 to 3 million years ago, needed water constantly. Surface water was unreliable. Streams dried up, pools evaporated, the landscape could be lethally dry for weeks, but rain left chemical traces. The most reliable trace was geosmin, released by Streptomyces bacteria in moistened earth. A nose that could detect geosmin at 5 parts per trillion could sense the direction of water from miles away, following the concentration gradient upwind to find moist soil, a puddle, a seasonal stream fed by recent rainfall. Humans are not the only species with this sensitivity. Camels can reportedly detect rain from distances of 50 miles or more, almost certainly using geosmin carried on wind currents across desert landscapes. The survival value is obvious. In an environment where the distance between water sources can be lethal, an animal that can smell wet earth from 50 miles away lives. An animal that cannot, dies. What makes human geosmin sensitivity particularly striking is that it survived an evolutionary cull. The human genome contains roughly 400 functional olfactory receptor genes, the largest gene family in our DNA. But our ancestors had closer to 1,000. Over millions of years of primate evolution, as vision became the dominant sense, the face shortened and the olfactory epithelium shrank, roughly 60% of olfactory receptor genes were silenced, mutated into non-functional pseudogenes that sit in our DNA like abandoned machinery. A dog has roughly 800 functional olfactory receptors. You have 400. Your nose got worse across the board, except for geosmin. That detection threshold, 5 parts per trillion, rivaling the best analytical chemistry instruments on Earth, survived the cull intact. Whatever receptor binds geosmin was under such strong selection pressure that evolution preserved it while discarding 600 others. I find this extraordinary. The ability to smell rain was more important than the ability to smell most of everything else. That emotional response, the relief, the calm, the unnamed feeling, may be an echo of what that detection meant. Finding water meant not dying. Your brain tagged the signal not just as important, but as safe. And that tagging, geosmin equals water equals survival, was reinforced across hundreds of thousands of generations until the sensitivity and the emotion became inseparable. Your brain is still running that program. Every time it rains, every time geosmin enters your nose at 5 parts per trillion, the ancient circuitry fires, safe, water nearby, relief. And because the olfactory pathway bypasses conscious processing, the feeling arrives before you have any idea why you feel it. You stand in the rain, and something settles in your chest, and you cannot name it, and now you know why you cannot name it. It is older than language. It is older than the part of your brain that names things. In the deserts of the American Southwest, rain triggers a completely different petrichor. The creosote bush releases resinous terpenes from its waxy leaves when rain dissolves them, producing a sharp medicinal smell that desert residents recognize instantly. Different molecule, different organism, same unnamed feeling. 2 independent chemistry pathways in 2 different ecosystems, both converging on the same human response when water returns to dry earth. Now, there is one more chemistry event. Your nose registers during a rainstorm, and it arrives before the petrichor does. Before petrichor arrives, there is another smell. The sharp, clean, almost electrical smell that precedes a thunderstorm. The one people describe as fresh or metallic or like the air has been scrubbed. That is ozone. Triatomic oxygen. O3 instead of the O2 you normally breathe. During a thunderstorm, the electrical discharge of a lightning bolt, which can reach temperatures of 30,000 Kelvin, roughly 5 times the surface temperature of the sun, rips apart O2 molecules in the air. The freed oxygen atoms are highly reactive. They collide with intact O2 molecules and bond, forming O3. The energy released in a single lightning bolt is enough to produce measurable ozone concentrations in the surrounding atmosphere. Ozone has a detection threshold of roughly 10 parts per billion, far less sensitive than your geosmin detection, but still acute enough to smell it from considerable distance. And because ozone is generated in the upper atmosphere by lightning occurring miles ahead of the storm front, it can be carried toward you by the storm's own downdrafts. Cold air descending from the thundercloud's interior pushes outward at ground level, carrying ozone molecules ahead of the rain. You smell the storm coming before a single drop has fallen. The sharp note in the air is a chemical message from lightning that happened miles away, carried to your nose by the storm's own wind. Then the first drops hit dry ground. Bubbles trap. Aerosols launch. Geosmin arrives. The complete sensory experience of rain is 2 separate chemistry events arriving in sequence, ozone first, the electrical signature of distant lightning, then Petrichor, the mechanical launch of bacterial death chemistry from soil. Your brain registers both. The sharp alertness of approaching discharge, then the deep earthy calm of water on soil. Two molecules, two detection systems, two emotional registers, arriving seconds apart, read by your nose as a single narrative, storm coming, then rain here. The next time it rains, and it will, if you step outside and stand in it for a moment, what enters your nose first is ozone. Molecules of O3 formed by lightning miles away, carried ahead of the storm by wind. Then, as the drops hit dry ground, geosmin, launched into the air by the mechanical burst of bubbles trapped between raindrop and soil, 5 parts per trillion. Your nose detects it. The signal bypasses your thalamus, reaches your hippocampus and amygdala before your cortex, and a memory surfaces. Not one you chose, not one you summoned, but one the molecule pulled from storage. Feeling before thought. The calm before the name. Nobody fully understands why geosmin sensitivity is so extreme. 200,000 times more sensitive than a shark to blood is a number that demands an evolutionary explanation, and the water detection hypothesis is compelling but not yet proven beyond doubt. Nobody has identified which specific receptor protein on your olfactory neurons binds geosmin with such extraordinary affinity. Out of roughly 400 functional olfactory receptor types, the one that detects geosmin at 5 parts per trillion has not been isolated, and nobody can fully explain why the emotional valence is so consistent, pleasant, calming, safe, across cultures, geographies, and languages. The molecule is a bacterial waste product released when soil microbes die. The feeling it produces is one of the most universal emotional experiences humans share. The gap between those two facts is where the mystery still lives. We do not know everything, but every time it rains, your brain runs the same ancient program. Geosmin binds, the signal bypasses the thalamus, the hippocampus fires, and a feeling older than language arrives before you can name it. Petra and ichor, stone and the blood of the gods. Bacteria die in the soil, and rain launches their chemistry into the air, and your nose catches it at 5 parts per trillion, and your brain says safe water, home, and pulls a memory from storage that you did not ask for and cannot refuse. That is Petrichor. That is the feeling you could not name. And the physics, from bacterial death to raindrop aerosol to olfactory receptor to hippocampal memory, has been running since before you were born, waiting for the next rain.